Hey everyone. So this writing notes video is going to be slightly outside the normal realm of what we do in English, what we do in the humanities. Because in this video I'm going to talk to you guys about collaborative writing. Now, collaborative writing is a major component of writing in the hard sciences and the social sciences, where you often get co-authored papers because people have done studies together or they've done experiments together or whatever it is. I mean, there's sciences papers that have 7 or 8 people listed as authors, and they all sort of worked on an experiment, and then people wrote up small bits and pieces or whatever it is. In the humanities, so in English, in modern languages, in the arts and things like this, history, political science, things like this, we rarely get co-authored papers. And we tend to be very skeptical about collaborative writing or about co-authoring writing, partially because we have this ingrained idea, this ingrained notion of the solitary genius. And a lot of people have taken this idea apart, but we have what's called the philosopher's paradox, which is just because we know consciously that something is not true, doesn't mean we behave as though we know it's not true. So, even though most people in, say, English and critical theory accept that there's no such thing as solitary genius, and all knowledge, all writing, all thought is based on a complex interplay of different influences from different people, we still behave as though singular writing, single-authored texts are more legitimate and more effective and convincing than co-authored papers. So, this is something that people like Andrea Lunsford have tried to sort of push us past. And Andrea Lunsford, for those of you who don't know, she is a composition theorist and a critical writing and composition and rhetoric theorist. And one of her big sort of critical focuses has been the importance of collaborative writing and sort of reclaiming collaborative writing and collaborative composition. But the idea ultimately is, when we get beyond this idea of single authorship, we can expand the way that we look at ideas and the way that we look at papers and composition and things like this. So, first off, all writing is, to some degree or another, collaborative. We all share ideas, even when we're not sort of discussing them with one another, because, I mean, for instance, I have running through my head the ideas of Rancière, Foucault, Lacan, Zizek, Lyotard, Judith Butler, and so on and so on. All of these people who have done critical writings, who have produced cultural theory, political theory, economic theory, whatever it is, psychoanalytic theory, they've all shaped the way that I think about the world and the way that I view knowledge. So there's always that collaborative component. The other set of things that I have in my head are Dr. Tim Nixon, Ryan Claycomb, Betty Elsie, Jim Lewin, Todd McGowan, Val Rohe, all of these people who have taught me. So people who I've had classes with, people who I have written papers for, and so on and so on. People who have shaped the way that I think about the writing process, the research process, and so on and so on. So to a certain degree, whenever I write, I'm also in collaboration with those voices and those ideas. So, this is one of the sort of fundamental premises of collaborative writing theory, is that we're all always collaborating anyway, so co-authoring should not be a problem. Now, co-authoring itself is slightly different Also, there's things like peer review and getting feedback and things like this. But co-authoring itself is not something that is respected or admired in the humanities. Essentially, co-authoring involves multiple authors being listed as composing a paper. And what that means may vary. So there's a couple of different strategies for co-authoring papers. A couple of different ways of approaching this that people tend to find useful. One would be to divide up the writing task and to assign different components of a paper to each author. So if you've got, say, a first half of a paper and a second half of a paper, and they sort of organically break that way, one author may write the first half, the other author may write the second half, and then you get together and you sort of smooth them out together so that they stylistically sound similar, and the ideas are connected and things like that. Obviously, before you set out to do that, you have to talk a lot about the ideas and figure out where the whole paper is going. So that's one approach to doing things, is to divide the paper into sections and divvy that responsibility up before coming back to sort of collectively work over a final draft. Another common technique is to work closely together and sort of compose together. So maybe one person types and the other person or the other people contribute ideas, and everybody contributes sort of continually throughout the process of writing, and then you just have one person who sort of transcribes what the group or what the partnership decides on to put into the paper. Another technique that's really been facilitated by the electronic era is collaborative writing programs. So things like Google Docs, you can create multiple authors on, and so if you put in, say, 3 authors, if you authorize 3 authors to work on one Google Docs, everybody can work simultaneously or on their own time. Everybody can work on this paper, and you can sort of go back and make corrections, elaborations. You can condense sections that other people have written. You can add new material. You can rewrite. You can pose questions. Any of this stuff. So you can create a group structured document. You can create something that you've all worked on together, but you don't have to sort of all be in the same room at the same time saying, here's what I think we should say next, and talking through everything. So you want to think, when you're doing collaborative writing, when you're working with other authors, you want to think about things like coming to a consensus. So this is one of the most basic and fundamental components of collaborative writing. You want to come to a consensus about what you're going to say, what your argument is going to be, why that argument matters. You want to think about style, tone, approach, voice, and things like that, because writers can have very, very different writing voices. And so you want to think about how do we develop a writing voice that reflects each of our personalities without sort of subsuming everybody under one voice. So how do we figure out a way that my voice is evident in the paper, and I'm actually sort of involved in a co-authoring project, so I'll use the names of the people who I'm co-authoring with. So how do I make sure that my voice is in there, and Sandy Baldwin's voice is in there, and Kwabina's voice is in there, and Gabriel's voice is in there, rather than just having Sandy's voice in the paper, because he's sort of the primary author and we're the sort of co-authors. So how do we get the paper to sound like it's one paper without sounding like it was written by one person? This is a question, and this is actually a very challenging question stylistically, in terms of tone and voice and things like this. How do we get it to sound collaborative without sounding like everybody just wrote their own little bit and we sort of stuck a transition sentence between them? You want to think about things like evidentiary norms. So making sure that everyone is on the same page with the kind of evidence, the kind of argument that you're making. Because if you take very different approaches, if you take very different sets of evidence and things like this, it can be hard to meld a paper. It can be hard to meld different sections of a paper into one. Or if you're working more collectively on it, if everybody is trying to pull the paper in a different direction, trying to use different evidence, different approaches, different ideas, it can be very hard to figure out a way to navigate all of that and create one paper. But ultimately that's what it comes down to. With collaborative writing, you're trying to take multiple voices, multiple perspectives, and multiple ideas and meld them. And I'm doing the melding gesture here, you can see this. You're trying to meld them, or you're trying to smooth them out so that they come across as one paper, one collectively authored document. And this is one of the challenges of collaborative writing. And when you sit down to work with someone or a group of people or whatever it is on collectively writing something, these are some of the questions that you need to figure out. You need to develop some kind of plan in order to approach this argument effectively.